Today, we become legends.
Mulan has exploded into the meta lately with a top 5 win rate in Conquest and appearing high on most people's power rankings. So if you're in need of some Mulan knowledge, either to play her yourself or to counter her a bit better, you've come to the right place. This guide will cover everything you need to know about Mulan in 4 simple sections. The basic overview, this will be Mulan's general playstyle, mechanics and roles she can play. Abilities in depth, everything about Mulan's abilities you could possibly need to know, even the small things will be covered here. Items and builds, self-explanatory, Mulan's best items and a couple of build examples to get started with. And finally, tips and tricks, any other tips or strategies I have for Mulan that don't really fit into any of the previous 3 sections. These are often quick things you can easily implement to get a little bit extra out of Mulan. But with the contents laid out, there will be timestamps on screen and in the pinned comment down below if you want to skip around, but let's get started with the Ascended Warrior, Mulan. Mulan is a warrior in Smite and her main role is solo. She's somewhat viable as a jungler too, but I won't be covering that here since she sees by far the most play in solo and I want to keep the guide to a manageable length. She has a weapon mastery system that makes your abilities stronger and gives them additional effects the more you use them. More detail on this in the abilities section coming up. Mulan is on the more aggressive side of warriors and loves to dive the backline with her above average damage for a warrior. If you like aggressive, high damage, bruiser style gameplay as opposed to more tanky styles, Mulan might just be for you. Mulan's passive, Training Arc, is her weapon mastery system I mentioned earlier. Mulan carries 3 weapons on the battlefield, sword, spear and bow, corresponding to her first, second and third ability respectively. Dealing damage with her 1, 2 and 3 will provide training towards mastering that ability's respective weapon. Hitting the 1 gives sword XP, hitting the 2 gives spear XP, hitting the 3 gives bow XP. Also, we'll discuss this more later in the actual ultimate section, but the ultimate provides XP for all 3 weapons. Here are the damage requirements for each weapon. Each one has 3 different levels of mastery. You start as unskilled, no bonuses at all. After 500 damage on sword and spear and 200 damage on bow, you become skilled, then adept, then mastered with that weapon. The benefits for mastery are extremely important, and this is a passive you really need to be paying attention to for most of the early game. It's important to know exactly when you'll level up your mastery on a certain ability, and you need to be consciously thinking about leveling these up as fast as possible. There's a general rule for mastery levels that applies to all 3 abilities. Skilled is some kind of buff or effect on hitting the ability, Adept is some kind of extra hit or new mechanic, and Mastered is a passive stat boost. 100% of god damage counts for mastery, but only 30% of minion damage. Each ability gains a new icon as you progress through the mastery levels, and you can see how close you are to your next level on each ability using her passive meter. There's also an additional effect on Mulan's passive that's unrelated to her weapon mastery system. Every 10 seconds, Mulan gains a buff that takes 2 seconds off of her next ability cast's cooldown. Simple but effective. It's good to pay attention to this buff so you can get the cooldown on the ability you need it the most on, but it's not essential to monitor this. You can just use this as 2-second CDR every now and then. Right, that's her passive. It's a large part of Mulan's kit, so hopefully it makes some sense to you now. Moving on to Mulan's first ability, Cross Strike. This is a cone damage ability that hits twice in front of Mulan. That's it for the base form of the ability, and you'll find that's often the case with Mulan since you get a ton of power from your weapon masteries. At skilled, Mulan gains a 25% attack speed buff after casting Cross Strike. At adept, a 3rd strike is added to the end, which has more range than the first 2, and as mastered, Mulan gains a passive 10% attack speed increase at all times. So as you can see, the ability once mastered is significantly stronger than when unskilled at the start of the game. The main mastery you're looking for is the middle tier, Adept. Once you get that extra slash, this ability becomes really amazing. The mastered benefit is nice, but the adept is really what's the game changer here. This is the same for the other 2 abilities also. The additional effect always comes at mastery level 2, aka adept. Mastery 1 and 3 are usually less significant. Mulan also has an AoE basic attack at the end of her attack chain, so the up to 35% attack speed provided at mastered on this ability is also really nice. Moving on though, we have Mulan's best ability by far, Spear Thrust. Again, at base, this ability is just mediocre. It just does line damage in front of you and slows enemies. The base damage on it is pretty respectable though, it's 120 at level 1. At skilled, Mulan heals per enemy hit with Spear Thrust up to 3. This is actually pretty significant compared to the skilled benefits of her other 2 abilities since it allows her to sustain really effectively. But we all know that Adept is where the money is at for Mulan, and this one's a doozy. Once Adept, Spear Thrust strikes twice instead of once, with the second strike having more range than the first and also dealing bonus damage if you hit the same target with both strikes. This is what makes this ability so insane. The damage goes off the charts with the double hit, dealing 600 base damage and 85% scaling. At Mastered, Mulan also gains a 5% passive power buff. So this ability is really the crux of Mulan's kit, even more so than her ultimate in my opinion. She can still only heal 3 times total, not 3 times per strike. You don't get 6 heals from this, but if you didn't heal 3 times on the first hit, you can get the remaining heals you need on the second hit up to 3. Make sure you're paying attention to when this ability will hit Adept. The power spike it gives is immense, it literally more than doubles the damage of the ability and makes it more flexible. For this reason, I prioritise her 2 early on over the 1, despite the 1 dealing more damage early. Getting this ability to Adept is key, especially in solo, and I'm willing to take a small damage loss to get that leveled up as fast as possible. Moving on though, Mulan's 3, Grapple, fires a roped arrow forward in a line. If she hits a god, she stuns, damages, and pulls the god towards her, while also jumping forward herself and slashing the enemy for more damage. Again, this base form is pretty weak, and at Adept it becomes really insane. At Skilled, Mulan gains a protection buff after hitting Grapple. At Adept, she gains the ability to grapple a wall for movement. This is a huge deal for Mulan, as are all the Adept upgrades really, but this gives her defensive mobility which she doesn't have before this becomes Adept, and that's very important. She can only use it offensively beforehand. This is amazing for escaping ganks or just closing the distance or getting around the map if you're not able to hit a god with it. At Mastered, Mulan gains 5% protections and 5% movement speed passively. So as I mentioned, leveling this ability to Adept is really important, so I recommend just using your 3 on enemies whenever possible until you get to Adept. Doesn't matter if you have 0 kill potential or could do more damage another way, getting this leveled up early is key so you can dash to walls. And finally we have Mulan's ultimate. This ult works like any other ult, there's no mastery bonuses like on her basic abilities, however it does provide XP towards your sword, spear and bow when they are used in the ability. Mulan dashes forward, slashing enemies with her sword, then slams the ground with her spear, knocking enemies up and dealing damage, then fires a bow shot that deals additional damage. Mulan also gains 30% increased protections for the entire cast and is CC immune also. So this ability is really powerful, but you have to be careful when you use it. Since the last 2 hits are performed stationary, it's very easy for enemies to see you ult and then just focus you down. You can cancel the ability early if this is becoming a problem for you, but of course that's at a loss of damage and CC. You can still pretty much throw this out whenever you want, but just do be aware that if you're dashing in on low health or into multiple people, it's probably going to get you killed by the self route that this ability imposes on you. Alright, so with her abilities covered, let's talk about how to build Mulan in solo. So for starting builds, I actually like both Warrior's Axe and Sigil right now. Take your pick on if you want to be more aggressive or more tanky. They both cost the same amount, so regardless which you choose, you can grab tier 1 Blackthorn Hammer and 4 potions. I go 3 health and 1 multi so I can box better really early on with the double stacked pots, plus a bit of mana regen so I can spam her abilities more for training skill. But the potions is really up to you, just don't buy mana potions in solo for the love of god, you have a blue buff and a totem for that specific reason. Builds are more complex than just copying 6 items that someone told you to build or you saw in the SPL, so what I like to do in my guides is provide a general item pool which are all good on the god that you can pick from to fit your playstyle and the current match environment. As always, I'll provide a full build example at the end to get you started though. So Blackthorn Hammer, of course, this is your rush in literally every matchup right now since it gives health, not protections. You can build it into magical or physical, it doesn't matter. Mystical Mail or Breastplate is usually my second option. Mystical is generally better and more aggressive, whereas Breastplate is going to make you more tanky and allow you to skill up faster because of the CDR and mana. In a magical matchup, Runic Shield is my go-to right after Blackthorn. Solo laners often don't build too much power, and Runic's passive can sometimes reduce their power to literally 0. But in general, it's just a great magical defense bruiser item for the laning phase. Glad Shield is a really nice mid to late game pickup since all of Mulan's abilities deal damage and will proc Glad Shield's passive effect. Keep in mind, you need a fair bit of protections to make this worth it. If your build is tilted towards power or health, this might not be as good. Pridwin is great on Mulan to combat her ultimate, leaving her vulnerable at the end. If you take a ton of damage, you at least get Pridwin Shield afterwards to keep fighting or get out. This has 20% CDR though, so if you're going to buy Pridwin, you can't really go Breastplate. Void Shield is always a solid pickup for bruiser stats with health, penetration, power, and defenses. Bulwark is usually my go-to later game magical defense. I don't rush this in magical solo matchups, I think Runic Shield is just better for that, but later in the game, Bulwark's passive can be absolutely life-saving in a similar way to Pridwin. And finally, you can never go wrong with a Mantle of Discord in 5th or 6th slot. As for starters, Sundering Axe if you went Warrior's Axe, Infused Sigil if you went Warding Sigil. Alright, so with Mulan's item pool covered, let's get into 2 full build examples to get you started in solo. A default build for a physical matchup, and an alternate one if you're facing a Guardian or Mage. For a physical matchup, start with Warrior's Axe. Again, this can be subbed out for Sigil if you want to. Tier 1 Blackthorn Hammer, 3 health and 1 multi-potion. Finish Blackthorn Hammer, then grab Mystical Mail, Bulwark of Hope, Pridwin, Mantle of Discord, finishing your starter into Sundering Axe or Infuse Sigil as soon as you can. For a magical matchup, the start is the same, but after Blackthorn Hammer you get Runic Shield, then Void Shield, Pridwin, Mantle of Discord, finishing your starter as before. As you can see, the builds don't change too much, you just cut Mystical Mail in a magical matchup for obvious reasons for Runic Shield and drop the Bulwark. I replaced Mystical with Void Shield as the next best option, since Mystical in 3rd slot is a bit too late in my opinion. Though I also like Glad Shield or Breastplate here, but again, keep in mind that you can't get Pridwin and Breastplate in the same build really without wasting CDR. But that's it for Mulan's items and builds. When using Mulan's 2 at Adept or higher, there's a fairly lengthy delay on the second hit which allows for retargeting if needed. For example, if you use this on archers and they die to the first hit, instead of just wasting a second, you can whip your aim around and land a second hit on melee minions or the enemy solo laner so the damage isn't wasted. Mulan's 3 gives a ton of immunity frames on hit where she can't be targeted. This is great for avoiding big abilities, buying time, or waiting for cooldowns on your other abilities. Here's some rough bro math numbers on when you should be getting Adept on each ability. Skilled and Mastered are nice, but outside of the 2 specifically, they're not essential to get online as soon as possible. The Adept versions though, you want those online quickly. They make the abilities almost twice as good as they were at Unskilled. Keep in mind, this is using my leveling order of maxing the 2 first, then the 1, then the 3. Also, make sure to hit the enemy solo as much as you can with your abilities since it gives way more XP on gods than hitting minions. Though if you're winning lane, your 3 should actually become Adept first, since it requires less than half the XP to level up than your 1 and 2 and can only hit gods so always gets full XP. Make sure you're just 3ing the enemy solo on cooldown until this hits Adept. I can't stress how important it is to get the wall grapple online early. You should be aiming for getting her 3 to Adept at or before 5 minutes, however if you're losing lane this becomes a lot harder to do since you don't really want to be diving in using her 3 if you're getting bodied. In that case, it's likely your last ability to get Adept, though it should still be Adept by around 8 to 10 minutes regardless. If it's not, you're just not using the 3 enough. It's extremely easy to level up and can't be used as defensive mobility until it's Adept anyway, so you may as well just use it on cooldown. After that, your 2 should become Adept next, roughly around 5 to 7 minutes depending on how well the lane is going and how easily you can poke the enemy god with it. This is one you should prioritize and actually focus on leveling up quickly since the benefit is by far the best out of all the Adept upgrades. And your 1 should follow shortly after at around 6 to 8 minutes in my experience. This is purely because you leveled the 2 first. If you leveled the 1 first, it would get Adept first. But the sustain from the 2 is too important in solo, so you max that and try to Adept it ASAP. So by 8 minutes you should really have all 3 to Adept, but that's if you're a solid Mulan player. I think aiming for full Adept at 10 minutes is realistic if you're newer to the god and or if you're losing lane. Also, another quick tip, once your 2 hits Adept, start using the 1 to clear and poke if it's up. Then only use the 2 if the 1's on cooldown, since the mastered buffs are less significant than the Adept ones. You'd rather have the 1 and 2 to Adept than 1 at mastered and 1 at skilled. This applies in reverse if you level the 1 and get that Adept faster than the 2, but I recommend leveling the 2 in solo, not the 1. But that's all I've got for Mulan. She's exploded into the meta recently and I'm sure a lot of you guys want to either play her yourself or know how to counter her if you're a solo laner, so hopefully this helped you out. If you want to see more god guides, definitely subscribe to the channel because I'll be pumping these out when season 9 drops. But that's it from me. Have a great day and peace out you nerds.